So I think we're getting to the point now where, Minister Robinson, who is our housing minister here with the NDP, are starting to hear that we have some real local issues around zoning and regressive councils, and we're not maximizing our land use decisions. So when Sam asked me to say something here, it just came at a good time because I was just in Victoria doing a presentation on behalf of the UDI, the Urban Development Institute, on rental housing specifically, which is primarily what I advocate for. I got into this in a sort of a circuitous way. I started writing a blog back in 2014 called 5 Kids, 1 Condo, and that set me up in a group of a tribe of sort of urbanist nerds, if you will. Seb is one of them. Did he have to leave already? Is he gone?
Early.
Oh, darn. Yeah, so that was Abundant Housing Vancouver. We formed that in 2016. I've since also formed Abundant Transit BC. I'm the spokesperson for BC Rental Project. So a lot of what I do these days is about rental housing and social housing advocacy. And I thought what was really interesting about what Seb had said, and it dovetails with what I'm talking about today, is municipal power and what they call in the States like local control. So local control over land use decisions, which is, if anybody sat through a little session at City Hall, you know that that's primarily what they spend their time on. And it forms a huge part of what you do in municipal government. And I think we're at a real crossroads with local control or municipal control over land use, because what we've seen in the last several years, certainly in the short time, the 5 years or so that I've been heavily involved in municipal affairs. I'm not fortunate enough to be elected. I ran last year, was it last year? Yeah, for city council. Placed 25th out of 71 people or something for city council. What a mess that was. But what we've seen is a bit of some step backs, some sort of regression on what I had hoped would be sort of progressive policy making on municipal land use. So we've seen specifically in Port Moody, they've got a fairly regressive council there, despite the fact that they've only grown by about 500 residents between the 2011 and 2016 census. They want to take steps to downzone certain parts of their city core, even though they have like 2 SkyTrain stations and a West Coast Express station in that area. So, investments that the province and the feds really need maximized aren't being done so by that council. West Vancouver, you saw something erupt around the bus lanes there, and their Mary, I can't remember her name, the mayor of West Van, Marianne Booth, is that her name? She's received death threats around initiatives like the bus lanes. So you have like hyper involved local residents, like in the district of North Vancouver, where they've shot down social and rental housing projects that should by right have gone through. So we see some real retrenchment on the municipal level. And it's been very disappointing. And even here in Vancouver, if you looked at 4575 Granville, was 21 rental townhomes that were taking the place of like a Shaughnessy house right there on Granville. And that was 10 hours of council time spent over, I think, 2 or 3 days to ultimately reject that proposal. And now will become a 13,000 square foot mansion. So getting even simple stuff like that passed at a local level has been extremely difficult. And I think it was Scott DeLangboom, who also works, or volunteers rather, within Abundant Housing, who pointed out that if we took that pace with every single sort of rental rezoning prospect that came in front of the city of Vancouver, we would take about 5.5 months of straight council time, no sleeping or eating, just to reach our yearly rental housing quotas. So obviously we have a broken system municipally. And this, when I ran in 2018, my hope was that we had a sort of a YIMBY, a yes in my backyard movement that would see us address this at a fundamental level. We haven't. We have some progressive councillors, quote unquote progressive councillors, that are in there right now. Councillor Swanson voted against all 662 units of market rental housing that has come to council so far in the year. Councillor Pete Fry has voted against more than half of them. So there's the COPE and the Green Party respectively. Unfortunately, and I know we're not supposed to be partisan here, we're not supposed to mention these names, but I think, it disappoints me because I know people, my peers, younger people, they vote often on labels. We are, I think, the only major Canadian city with political parties at a municipal level. Is that correct? And so we use these as like easy heuristics to understand who we should vote for and hopefully get the city we want in the future. And right now we have just started, or I guess we're almost a year into this process now, the new citywide plan process here in Vancouver. And the hope was that in the course of this council term, which is 4 years, as we all know, we would get to the end of that citywide plan process and see perhaps new broad zoning regulations, as Sebastian alluded to, around land use, so that we could plan in a way that didn't have us fighting over 4 or 5 story, quote, towers on, Commercial Drive going forward. And it sounds like, based on what we've heard from staff in the last week, that we won't get to zoning reform inside of those 4 years. The next council will have to adopt that and move that forward, which is also disappointing because this is a very long process. We're in a housing crisis and we need action on this. So I think when I say we're at a crossroads, we have to just look south to California, to Oregon, to see what happens when you're in a real pressure cooker of bad land use decisions. In California, they're literally on fire because they've made terrible land use decisions. And the kind of stuff that California State Senator Scott Wiener is bringing up, like SB 50, State Bill 50, which goes to their, I guess you call it House or Senate, I don't really know, at this, I guess Senate at the California level there. That goes to the Senate for vote in January. That would basically upzone anywhere in California that is deemed job or transit rich, so areas around jobs and transit, taking away local control, which in this case I think if your municipalities are actively blocking housing, you have to do. Oregon just recently passed their own bill that upzoned similarly, like cities over 25,000 people have to allow triplexes citywide. So I think we're getting to the point now where Minister Robinson, who is our housing minister here with the NDP, are starting to hear that we have some real local issues around zoning and regressive councils, and we're not maximizing our land use decisions. And if we're not careful and we don't, elect a new generation, a new way of thinking, maybe in 2022 at a municipal level here, those decisions may not reside with council anymore. And maybe that's a good thing. I know I've been involved now in it for a few years on the advocacy side, and to Nikki's point, you see the same people in every single meeting. They're West Side homeowners usually, nothing against West Side homeowners, but they cannot run the city exclusively. And we really need a new way of thinking at a municipal level so that the municipal politicians are part of the solution and not pushed to the edge going forward. Thanks.